In 39 AD, young girls entered Rome's most magnificent palace, dressed in white, believing they were blessed by the gods. But behind marble walls and golden doors, a system awaited them, one designed not to kill the body, but to methodically destroy the soul. This is what really happened. Before we reveal the dark truth hidden behind Rome's golden facade, I need you to do something. If you believe that history's darkest chapters must be told not to shock, but to warn them, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell, because stories like this, stories that powerful institutions tried to erase, need to be heard. This video took weeks of research to bring you the truth. Your subscription ensures we can keep uncovering what history tried to bury. Now, let's step into the shadows of ancient Rome. In the year 39 AD, Rome was the most powerful city on earth, but something had changed. The city that once roared with confidence now moved with caution. Conversations in the forum stopped mid. Senators walked with their heads down. Even the crowds seemed quieter than before. At the center of it all stood the Palatine Hill, the birthplace of Rome, where Romulus had founded the city 8 centuries earlier. Now, it was crowned with the imperial sprawling complex of marble halls and guarded chambers, overlooking the entire city, but the people could not see. Inside, the man who ruled from this palace was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History would remember him as Caligula. He had taken power 2 years earlier, in March of 37 AD. At age, Rome had erupted in celebration. His predecessor Tiberius had been old, distant, and paranoid, ruling through fear from his isolation on Capri. Caligula was different, young, charismatic, the son of Germanicus, a general beloved by the people. When he first addressed the Senate, he promised reform. He freed political prisoners. He reduced taxes. He hosted spectacular games, filling the Circus Maximus with gladiators and exotic animals. Rome felt alive again, but by 39 AD, something had shifted. The games continued. The palace still glittered, but the cheers had grown hollow. Senators no longer spoke freely. Families who had once celebrated their daughter's selection to serve in the imperial household now did so with forced smiles. Behind the marble columns and golden doors of the Palatine, something was taking shape. Not a rebellion, not a war, something quieter, something that those who knew refused to name out loud. Even the most powerful men in Rome's men who commanded legions and shaped laws walked past the palace and felt a chill they could not explain. What was happening inside those walls that even senators feared to speak of? Imperial officials moved through Rome with tablets and instructions. They visited wealthy and poor homes alike, searching for girls who met 3 criteria: age 12 to 16, physical beauty, and virginity. In Roman society, honor meant everything. When officials arrived, families rarely refused. Many competed for the chance. Having a daughter selected for palace service elevated social standing and created political connections. The promises were carefully made. Your daughter will serve Drusilla, the emperor's sister. She will learn music and philosophy. She will participate in sacred ceremonies. She will live in luxury. Families believed this was a blessing. They dressed their daughters proudly and thanked the officials. But this was not education or religious service. It was systematic procurement, designed to supply the palace with young girls. Those selected were taken to a section called the Garden of Venus. The name suggested divine beauty and protection. The reality was something else entirely. Livia was 14 years old when the officials came to her family's home. She was the daughter of a modest patrician family, educated, obedient, and raised to respect Roman tradition. When her father received the news that she had been chosen, he called it a blessing. Her mother wept, though Livia couldn't tell if the tears were from joy or something else. On the day she left, Livia wore a white tunic her mother had woven for the occasion. Around her neck hung an amber necklace, saved for years for a moment like this. As the imperial cart carried her up the Palatine Hill, people in the streets watched. Some looked at her with admiration, others with something closer to pity. The first days in the palace were unlike anything she had known. Servants offered her baths perfumed with oils from the east. They gave her tunics made of silk so fine they felt weightless. She ate fruits she had never seen before, dates from Africa, pomegranates from Greece, honey that seemed to melt on her tongue. Everything was beautiful. Everything was controlled. Livia told herself she was fortunate. She would serve Drusilla, the emperor's sister. She would learn music and philosophy. She would bring honor to her family. She believed what she had been told because she had no reason not to. Then came the summons. It arrived without warning. Servants entered her chamber and presented her with a different gown, white like the others, but thinner, almost translucent in the lamplight. They dressed her in silence, their faces carefully blank. No one explained where she was going or why. They led her through marble corridors to the great banquet hall. The room was filled with senators, military commanders, and wealthy patricians reclining on cushioned couches. The air was thick with incense and wine. Musicians played in the corner, but the music felt distant. Muffled at the center of it all, on a raised platform, sat Caligula. He was younger than she expected, handsome, even, but when he smiled, the expression never reached his eyes. There was something empty behind them, something that made her skin go cold, despite the warmth of the room. The guests turned to look at her. Their gazes moved over her like hands. She was not greeted. She was evaluated, studied, discussed in murmurs. She couldn't quite hear but understood perfectly. She was not a guest. She was part of the display. Caligula gestured, and she was made to walk between the tables. Men she didn't know made comments. Some laughed, others watched in silence, their discomfort visible but unexpressed. No one helped her. No one looked away. That night, without violence that could be seen or described in clear terms, Livia learned there are fates worse than death. The Garden of Venus was beautiful. Marble columns lined the chambers. Silk curtains filtered the sunlight into soft golden streams. The air was always perfumed with frankincense and myrrh. Every surface gleamed. Every meal was a feast. Every comfort imaginable was provided. But there were no schedules, no explanations, no clarity about anything. The girls woke each morning not knowing what the day would bring. They didn't know when they would be called. They didn't know why some were summoned while others were left waiting. They didn't know how long they would stay or if they would ever leave. The human mind needs patterns to feel safe. It searches for predictability, for cause and effect. In the Garden of Venus, there were none. The uncertainty became a form of torture more effective than chains. Roman physicians who treated the girls recorded symptoms that appeared with disturbing consistency: rapid breathing, sleeplessness, episodes where they seemed to disconnect from their inability to eat. These were not physical illnesses. They were the mind breaking under pressure it was never designed to withstand. Caligula understood psychology in ways that made him dangerous. He alternated cruelty with unexpected kindness. A girl might be ignored for days, then suddenly receive an expensive gift. She might be humiliated one evening, then invited to dine privately the next. This unpredictable cycle created a twisted dependence. The girls began to believe that if they behaved correctly, they might earn his favor. They couldn't see that the game had no rules. The surveillance was constant. Praetorian guards stood at every corridor. Servants reported conversations. When girls formed friendships, they were separated. Caligula knew that connection is resistance. He couldn't allow them to find strength in each other. Some girls stopped speaking entirely, not from physical injury, but from psychological collapse. They continued to breathe, to move when instructed, but something essential inside them had gone silent. The physicians had no cure for this. They couldn't treat what they didn't understand. The cruelest aspect of the garden wasn't the marble walls or the locked doors. It was the way it convinced the girls that escape was impossible, not just physically, but mentally. They began to believe this was their fate, that they deserved it, that there was no world outside these perfumed chambers that would take them back. A prison made of silk is still a prison. Sometimes it's the most effective kind. The banquets were not spontaneous celebrations. They were carefully staged political rituals, and attendance was mandatory for senators and high-ranking officials. But being present wasn't enough. Caligula required them to watch. Looking away was interpreted as disapproval. Disapproval was insult. Insult could mean death. This was the perverse genius of his system. He transformed private humiliation into a public loyalty test. Every senator who sat in silence became complicit. Every official who watched without objection became part of the machinery. Caligula occasionally offered girls temporarily to favored officialsmen who couldn't refuse without risking their positions or lives. By accepting, they bound themselves to his crimes. Guilt spread like poison through the ranks. Responsibility became so diluted that no single person could be blamed. The entire court operated on forced silence. Senators who commanded legions, men who shaped Roman law, sat through these rituals, and said nothing. They told themselves they had no choice. They were probably right. Caligula was testing them, pushing boundaries to see how far Roman dignity could bend before it broke. The answer was disturbing. It never broke. The rope never snapped. Rome's elite, the supposed guardians of tradition and virtue, proved willing to tolerate anything to preserve their positions and their lives. The system didn't need violence to function. It needed cowardice. And cowardice, it turned out, was abundant. A letter survived from a woman named Inia, wife of a Roman senator. Her niece had been selected for the palace. For months, the family heard nothing. When they finally secured a brief visit through discreet bribes, what they saw devastated them. The girl had lost weight. She spoke in scripted phrases. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Inia wrote that she looked like someone breathing but no longer living. These visits were carefully orchestrated. Girls were prepared like dolls' perfect hair, clean tunics, coached words. They were instructed to say they were honored, happy. Any deviation brought punishment. After the family left, parents sat across from their daughters and thanked the emperor for the privilege. They knew, but speaking meant death for themselves, for their families, possibly for the girl herself. Some girls chose suicide. It was the only decision left to them, the only act of control in a life that had become completely controlled. Roman society had no space for this kind of grief. Honor mattered more than truth. Reputation mattered more than justice. Families who should have been protectors became part of the system that trapped their daughters. They didn't choose this role, but silence made them complicit anyway. Love, in the end, wasn't enough to save anyone to understand why the Garden of Venus existed without opposition. You must understand Roman power itself. Roman law placed women under absolute male authority first, their fathers, then their husbands. When a girl entered imperial service, that authority transferred to the emperor. Legally, she had no protection. No tribunal could intervene. No magistrate could question imperial decisions. The Praetorian Guard, created to protect Rome, functioned as enforcers of personal tyranny. Their loyalty was purchased with wealth and privilege. They protected power, not justice. Corruption was systematic. Every official involved selectors, palace administrators, physicians who treated symptoms but ignored causes, profited from cooperation. Silence was rewarded. Questions were dangerous. Roman culture dismissed women's suffering as exaggeration or hysteria. Their emotions didn't carry weight. If society didn't value their voices, neither would the palace. The crucial truth: Caligula didn't invent this system. He exploited structures Rome had built over centuries. The inequality already existed. The mechanisms of control were already in place. He simply pushed them further than anyone had dared. Rome's hierarchy made the tragedy possible, where power concentrates without limits, where law protects the powerful instead of the vulnerable. Suffering doesn't just happen, it repeats. The Garden of Venus wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of a system designed to enable exactly this kind of abuse. On January 24, 41 AD, in a palace corridor lit by flickering torches, Cassius Chaerea and fellow conspirators struck. Caligula died, not facing an enemy army, but surrounded by men sworn to protect him. They didn't kill him for the girls. They killed him because he had humiliated them, insulted their honor, made them feel powerless. The victims in the Garden of Venus were never part of their calculation. The palace fell into chaos. Doors that had been locked for years suddenly stood open. Guards fled. Servants disappeared. Some girls ran immediately, driven by pure survival instinct. Others remained frozen, unable to process that the orders had stopped. Fear had conditioned them so thoroughly that freedom felt unreal. Claudius, the new emperor, faced an impossible problem. Acknowledging what happened would admit Rome had allowed institutional abuse. His solution was silence. The girls were returned to their families quietly, with no ceremonies or explanations. Gifts accompanied them: coins, jewelry, fine cloth. These weren't gestures of care. They were bribes to ensure silence. The girls who descended the Palatine Hill were not the same ones who had climbed it. Something fundamental had been taken that could never be returned. The girls who returned home carried invisible wounds that never fully healed. Historical records document the symptoms: chronic nightmares, inability to tolerate physical touch, constant anxiety, difficulty forming emotional bonds. Some avoided sunlight after years in enclosed chambers. Others woke screaming in the night, reliving what they could not speak about during the day. Roman society had no framework for this kind of trauma. There were no counselors, no therapists, no acknowledgement that psychological wounds could be as devastating as physical ones. Families expected their daughters to resume normal lives, marriage, children, household duties, but normal was impossible. The evidence of their suffering survived in fragments, testimonies dictated by elderly women decades later, letters hidden in villa walls, medical records describing conditions physicians couldn't explain or treat. The pattern was consistent. Returning home didn't mean returning to life. Freedom became its own challenge, learning to make choices after years of having none, trusting people after being surrounded by surveillance, believing in safety after living in constant threat. The hardest truth may have been this: learning to live when you had spent so long believing you didn't deserve to. Survival, it turned out, was just the beginning of a different kind of struggle. Rome tried to erase what happened in the Garden of Venus. Archives were modified. Names disappeared from official records. The reign of Caligula was reduced to tales of eccentricity and madness, easier to dismiss than to confront. But fragments survived. Clay tablets buried in forgotten storage rooms, letters hidden behind villa walls, testimonies dictated by elderly women who refused to let their stories die with them. Modern historians debate the details. Some argue ancient sources exaggerated for political purposes. Others point to the consistent patterns across multiple independent accounts, patterns that suggest the core truth is undeniable. What cannot be disputed is this: when power concentrates without limits, when no systems exist to check authority, suffering follows predictable patterns. The mechanisms haven't changed. Today, abuse still hides behind institutional prestige in universities, religious organizations, corporations, entertainment industries. The same dynamics repeat. Reputation valued over truth, silence rewarded as loyalty, vulnerability treated as opportunity. The names and settings change, but the structure remains. This is why remembering matters, not as an exercise in ancient history, but as a warning. The Garden of Venus teaches us that the greatest enabler of abuse isn't the individual tyrant, it's the system that protects him and the collective silence that allows it to continue. Memory is resistance. Speaking is power. As long as silence remains possible, as long as prestige can hide truth, stories like Livia's will repeat in new forms, with new faces, but always the same darkness underneath. The question isn't whether such things could happen again. The question is whether we'll recognize them when they do. The Garden of Venus was buried by time, but its echo never died, because the greatest threat to justice isn't the tyrant, it's the system that protects him, and the silence that lets him thrive. Remember their names, even when history tried to erase them.